Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm in Chicago, and it's a joy to be with you today as I join you from a place where that everybody says will be popping in August when the DNC arrives to town, or will it be virtual? I'm not sure. We're going to talk about that with this wonderful panel. I'm Santita Jackson here on AM 950 Radio. I want you to meet my morning stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Everybody like and subscribe and click the bell so that when we come up, you'll be notified. But please, everyone, share the show with somebody. Just with one person. That's all you need to do. I heard some people trying to describe it on. I saw some people trying to describe it on Twitter. It touched me so greatly, and they were trying to describe it's like a radio show, but we can see it on YouTube, so it kind of looks like a TV show. Blah blah blah. All of that. Yeah, we're doing all of that so that you can put some names. And so you put the names and the faces together. Please go to the Santita Jackson Facebook page, Santita Jackson and Friends. It's Santita Jackson and Friends. Become my friend there. That's the only page where you'll be allowed to do that. And at Santita J on Twitter, at Santita J on Twitter, or is it X? Let's talk about the DNC. I would like to let everyone know, go to rainbowpush.org, our international conference. Jim Narekas of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, Dr. David Gibbs, University of Arizona historian Sheila Garland from the Poor People's Campaign, and Lenny Brody, longtime activist from the Poor People's Campaign. Thank you for being here. Everyone, Rainbow Push, our international conference will lead into the Democratic Convention, Jim. August 13th through the 17th, and the convention itself begins on the 18th. To meet and to organize at Rainbow Push at 930 East 50th Street, which is, and just so that you know, Operation Push, which is really the home organization of Rainbow Push. And we welcome our board chair to the show attorney, C.K. Hoffler. It is the largest landowning civil rights organization in the state. We own our building. We have a big backyard. We hope that it will be full, 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 full. It will be a place where activists can meet. That is Reverend Jackson's history. He is an organizer. So let me get right to it. I've got Dwight McKee, who's steadying himself into the camera right now. And once he does, I'll bring him from backstage. But let me start with you, Jim Narekas, and you, Dr. Gibbs, because I know that you all have to leave. Jim Narekas, let me start with you. There is now discussion, there are discussions, plural, about the Democratic Convention. Maybe it should be virtual, at least certain parts of it. The headlines ask you, how can we shield the president from protests? And then, of course, we had a violent breakup of, well, not just of the encampment at UCLA and at UNC Chapel Hill, but here at the University of Chicago. I was talking to a friend of mine whose politics are far to the right of mine, but she and I are very dear friends anyway, because she's just a lovely person. And she was talking about these protesters, and they sounded, I was very clear that she had been heavily messaged by the corporate media. And she had no idea who these young people were. Furthermore, she had no idea who the counter protesters are, because they're just being called counter protesters. They're not being called Zionists, which many of them are ardent, and we don't know where they're from. That they're the provocateurs, and we don't know who else is doing the provoking, but we do know that it's not these students. The students at the University of Chicago were awakened at 4:40 in the morning by police in riot gear. UCLA, the UCLA police and the LAPD stood down for 3.5 hours as those young people in the encampment were beaten. They just watched them get beaten. So talk to me. What are you expecting, Jim? Because the alarms are sounding. The corporate media, every time you see a photo, and you know this because you are an expert on media. Every time they talk about Chicago, every time they talk about the convention in Chicago, they show riots.
Right. There's a wave of nostalgia for 1968, kind of anti-nostalgia, where the media are sort of rubbing their hands saying, is this going to be a replay of 1968 when the the Democratic convention was engulfed in riots, and that's the kind of scare message that's being put forward that there's going to be some kind of violent event at the Democratic convention, and the I don't think it's any surprise to you that the corporate media are not big fans of demonstrations. They tend to look at them as the way you would look at fans at a sporting event running onto the field. It's the regular people are supposed to sit and listen to politics. They're supposed to be spectators. They're not supposed to be participants. And when the political press corps is covering conventions, the emphasis is on control and discipline, and any amount of debate, any kind of dissension that occurs at a convention is treated as a failure on the part of the candidate and a sign of the candidate's weakness, and a harbinger of defeat in November. This is something that goes way back, and your father actually played a starring role in the narrative that the press corps runs on conventions, where for convention after convention, there was an obsession with whether the Democratic Party, whether the winning candidate, the nominees posse was going to let Jesse Jackson get away with too much and have too much of a say in the platform or just in the discussion that happens at the convention. It's treated as a litmus test of whether the party was serious, whether the candidate was serious, whether they're going to have a successful convention or not. Your father was treated as the sort of boogeyman that had to be shut down in order to prove that the candidate had what it takes to be a serious contender in the fall. And of course, your father is a symbol to corporate media of the Rainbow Coalition, the wide array of progressive forces that are a critical part of the Democratic coalition, people that you can't win an election without, but corporate media are intensely suspicious of them, as are much of the party establishment is intensely suspicious of these progressive forces. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And so there's a narrative that views these kind of outsiders as they're viewed, as a danger that needs to be suppressed. And I think this year the protesters against genocide are going to be the symbol of the progressive forces that need to be controlled, marginalized, silenced, in order for the Democratic Party to prove to corporate media that they are wedded enough to the establishment to be trusted with 4 more years of power. I think that's the narrative that's going on here. And so far the indications are that the Democratic Party is going to do whatever it takes to make sure that the protesters are silenced, suppressed. They're talking about giving a permit to protest 4 miles from the convention. You might as well let them demonstrate in Milwaukee. If they're 4 miles from the convention, they're irrelevant to the actual event. And this is, I think, the Democrats' way of saying, yes, we are going to be controlling these forces. We're going to be suppressing them as much as we can. They're proving their bona fides, and it is really, I think, self-defeating in the sense that you are by trying to silence people, by trying to keep them miles away, literally, from the convention. You are setting up a confrontation that is going to become the kind of chaos that the media are going to be looking for to show, aha, the Democrats don't have their act together. They're allowing these radical forces to cause trouble. We hear a lot about violence at the campus protests, and when you look at the actual the real reality of what's going on campuses, you see that the violence is, number one, coming from police who are violently suppressing people trying to make a statement against genocide, and secondarily, it's coming from organized right-wing forces that are coming in as in UCLA to attack people who are exercising their right to free speech. In many cases, the people in UCLA, some of them have ties to the Proud Boys, the kind of far right goon squad that has latched on to the Israel issue, not because they have any particular interest in Israel as an issue, but because they see this as a good excuse to beat up on the left, which is their kind of their reason for being. And so by trying to silence people who are making a desperate plea to President Biden to stop supporting a genocidal assault, to stop supporting the forced starvation of 2 million people in Gaza. They are creating the conditions for a violent reaction that is not going to be helpful for their cause, for the it's setting themselves up for disaster, I think.
Well, Dr. Gibbs, what do you think? I mean, because now they're even talking, thank you, Jim Narekas, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And please give them your support, fair.org. Dr. David Gibbs, your thoughts? They're even talking about having some aspects of the convention held virtually. Jim Narekas and Dr. Gibbs, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, Sheila Garland, Dwight McKee, that Mr. Brody, I have them, two of them backstage, but virtual. This is not the pandemic. And one of the headlines is, shielding, the president from the protesters. I'm like, but you're going to ask these same people to vote for you. How's that going to work? Dr. Gibbs.
There was a time in American history when political conventions were deliberative bodies that actually debated issues and where they debated which candidates to select. But I think that after the 68 convention and the 72 convention, which were seen as disorderly and contributed to the Democrats' failure to win the presidency in those years, they've pretty much changed the convention entirely to be a giant form of
TV show.
A TV show, infotainment, I suppose, something like that. And where nothing important happens and you don't get any debate, you don't get any dissenting opinions. It's gotten worse and worse over time. It's clearly been a decision. It reflects a more generalized tendency in U.S. politics and U.S. society against the idea of debating people you disagree with. You simply freeze them out of discussion. That is the general part of the culture we're in right now. It also concerns, I mean, another aspect to this is a hostility to what people have termed populism, which one might say is democracy, is another word for it. If one wants to look at it a bit cynically, when it gets this constant talk about the populist threat to democracy, one could respond that populism, in a sense, is democracy. All right. And so the idea is to freeze out criticism of Israel because the elite consensus has always been that the U.S. backs Israel no matter what it does, backs it to the hilt. It's been going on for 50 years now, since the early 70s. And, any challenge to this key elite position is simply not worthy of discussion and requiring repression. And so we're seeing repression at multiple levels. And the likelihood of repression at the Chicago Convention fits in perfectly to this long-term trend. So, I don't see this very positively. I suppose one other thing I would add, though, is that I am somewhat dismayed to see that, if I'm not mistaken, a majority of the public does not view the demonstrators in a positive light, still sees U.S. Support for Israel. At least it's getting narrower and support's going down, but it's still quite substantial. I think it reflects a number of things. One of them, obviously, is the way the media is presenting it. I mean, Jim Norikis obviously can discuss this at great length, I'm sure. But it also reflects decades of propaganda. I don't know any other word for it. That Israel is a sole democracy in the Middle East, a beacon of democracy, in this sea of, irrationality and Arab terrorism, just to use the language of the media. This has been going on and on for decades, and it's had its effect. And obviously, people don't really have time to look into this issue very carefully. If you're working as a cashier at a Walmart or something, you don't have time to look at this carefully. So it's natural people are going to be influenced by these things. And it does influence them. I suppose I do have to add, though, I think that the demonstrators, in my view, in this case as in so many others, could always do a better job of presenting their case to the public. I think they presented at a level of sympathy for the Palestinians and hostility to, again, the anti-Semitism issue is mostly a red herring. It's just largely an invented issue, as far as I can tell. But, obviously there's a lot of criticism of the Israeli state. The whole doctrine of Zionism is being criticized. I personally don't have any problem with that criticism. I agree with it. But nevertheless, it's being presented. Bottom line is people like Israel in the United States. A lot of them certainly do. And so I think the demonstrators be better. I like effectiveness. I like the idea of winning on a few issues. I think the demonstrators be better would better advised to focus on the issue of massive U.S. financial support for Israel, of a sort that weakens American security and diverts money that could be better used to raise living standards in the United States of the American public. I think that would be a very effective strategy that would reach a lot more people with much greater impact than the idea of emphasizing so much what Israel is doing wrong. It's maybe the issue should be what America is doing wrong here. And what is America's interest in this? I'm not that big a fan of a nationalist approach, but the question is what works. I think that would work a lot better than what the demonstrators are doing now. And I think that would have a real potential for getting majority support and presenting a much more direct threat to this policy and presenting a much more effective challenge to it. So I suppose I would add that. In other words, there's always going to be media bias, and there's always going to be propaganda, and this is very well funded. And propaganda within limits can work, and often does work. Question is, given those limitations, what can you do to get around that? And I think a lot of things could be done that aren't being done. I'm being a little bit influenced here because I spent the last 15 years studying the American right. I've been going through their papers, and they play to win. When they play to win. And if they have a strategy that doesn't work, they change their strategy. I wish the left would learn from that and try that sometime.
Yeah, I'm wondering because I think that the DNC's approach to this convention is wrongheaded. To go virtual,
Yeah.
I'm like, no. To put the demonstrators 4 miles away at the very least, but also shut down many avenues here in Chicago where they will not be able to demonstrate. I don't think that's a good idea. And Gaza, while it's a galvanizing point, Chicago is also at the heart of this migrant issue in the United States.
Mm.
You can have people marching about a lot of different things. And I think one of the things that is unsettling, Dwight McKee, I want to bring you in now. What is unsettling is that it appears that they're setting things up for a really bad, a nasty confrontation, and it does not have to be that way. Dwight McKee.
Well, I don't totally agree with that analysis. I think that there's nothing that the demonstrators can do to change the narrative. The narrative is locked in. It's not a real convention; it's a production, and so it's going to be set up like like a TV film production. And anything that goes contrary to the script is going to be disbarred. Uh, that narrative is so set and so controlled by the press and so controlled by the political establishment that there's no argument that's going to be presentable that will change the minds of the average America who's not looking behind the veil. But I think what the protesters can do is do that which they do well is protest, and those who are involved in the protest can then negotiate their and leverage their vote uh, during the actual election, and can be the difference in those marginal states that are supporting this war effort, uh, and can turn the actual election around. The problem with that, and the difference between 68, is in 68 we had a viable candidate who was a peace candidate, who was McCarthy. And so there was an alternative that you could support, and go to and leverage against. In this situation, the only one you have as an alternative is Trump, who in many ways is worse on the issue. And so, it's going to be uh my fear is that if the police become repressive, that it's going to end up just a battle between the protests and the police, as it has happened in 1968. And the other dimension that you have this time around that you didn't have so much in 68 is you had left wing provocateurs who are funded, to also create chaos. And in Chicago, you have all these marauding young people who have nothing to do with politics that's going to take full advantage of what's going on politically and with the police being preoccupied to raid these stores and to raid downtown and, to rob people in the streets. And so all I see out of it is chaos. I don't see any resolution at any level.
Well, before Jim Narikas and Dr. Gibbs go, um, Jim, in a few minutes, I mean, what do you see?
Well, I think that sorry, I think the protesters have very little ability to take part in the debate. There's a real, as I said, the corporate media view ordinary people participating in politics as a violation of the rules. And just because you have a mass protest movement that could involve, thousands or even millions of people, that doesn't mean that you are going to be brought on to meet the press or face the nation to take part in the discussion. There's the coverage of protests it's very much like nature programming, where you see like the protesters in their natural habitat, and they're talked about. They're not talked with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the message of the protesters, I think, is not really aimed at the narrative of the corporate media. It's aimed at having a kind of sideways conversation that can be had to some extent through social media. And there's been some overt discussion among policymakers of how TikTok in particular needs to be shut down because it's allowing this kind of conversation, because a discussion of what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza, can be had through social media that does not require persuading the gatekeepers of the public media to take your issue seriously. I would, when you were talking about how there is a long-standing propaganda about Israel as the sole democracy in the Middle East, and so on, I do think that needs to be challenged. You know, there has to be. You're right that it does play a big part in people's. People are reading the demonstrations through the lens of this narrative that they've been given for decades, and people need to hear a different narrative. The fact that the major human rights groups, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem in Israel, all say that the system in Israel is an apartheid system, which is the opposite of democracy. It's something that I think most Americans do not know about because it's not talked about in corporate media. I think that you really have to talk about the basic issue being that Israel was a country created through ethnic cleansing, and that the people who were ethnically cleansed rightly do not accept that status, and that is the origin of this conflict, is that there needs to be justice for the people who were kicked off their land in 1948, and unless we talk about that history, I don't think people will ever be able to understand what really is at stake in this situation.
Dr. Gibbs, your closing thoughts.
Well, I think it is. There's no doubt that the historical record all shows that Israel was founded on the basis of an apartheid idea, and that developing over decades. Israeli historians themselves have documented this. I think like Benny Morris was very conservative and supports it. He openly says ethnic cleansing was the basis of Israel's creation. It's clear in the documents. The new Israeli historians, they were called in the 1980s, documented this thoroughly. I just wonder how effective that would be as a political strategy in this country. And that, again, what I'm thinking of is working class people who vote. And I don't think they have time to really deal with these issues or sort them out and that kind of thing. And so the question I'm asking is, what is mostly going to be effective in reaching the kind of people I'm describing here? And I think guns versus butter, that's the one that's going to be effective. We're spending generally across the board too much on guns, too little on butter. It's affecting people's living standards, including your living standards. Israel's a big part of that. All right, the massive amount of support we've been giving Israel. And I think the official numbers even understate the support. I'm sure there's lots of forms of support we're giving as well. All of this basically means it contributes to lowered living standards for working people in the United States. No, you might say that's a parochial appeal, but first of all, people are entitled to worry about their living standards. I'm not bothered by that fact at all. And secondly, it's effective. My guess is that'll be much more effective than emphasizing and telling the story of the history of Israel's creation and so on. I just don't see that as reaching a lot of people. I mean, I'm in a bubble and I'm in a university, and that's what we talk about here. That's what we express ourselves. It's easy to forget. Most people aren't in that bubble. And so the question is, how do we reach them? And I think their living standards, how this is affecting your living standards and your security. All right. What's in it for you? I'd like to see much more of that being raised by activists on this issue. And again, the basic idea should be, we should try to think about how do we win on this issue.
Well, and listen to the people. You got to let them march. If you don't, because we're already not listening, you can see, because our policies are antithetical to their positions. It's just, You're snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. This is such a winnable issue for Democrats. If Democrats would be Democrats. Dr. David Gibbs, historian from the University of Arizona, Jim Narekas, fair.org. They need your support. Your book, the name of the title of it, and when is it coming out, Dr. Gibbs?
Yeah, it's called Revolt of the Rich, How the Politics of the 1970s Widened America's Class Divide. It'll be out at the end of this month in about 2 weeks.
Can we pre-order it on Amazon?
Oh, yes. Yes, you can. Thank you for bringing it up, Santita. I really appreciate
Come on,
it.
I bring it up every time I'm on here. I know you're like, what? This woman, he just, Attorney G.K. Hoffley just looks at me and he just giggles. I'm like, hello, that's why it's part of the reason you're here. Aside from your brilliance, of course, I'm blinded by that. But I'm just saying what I need is the name of the book again.
Revolt of the Rich, How the Politics of the 1970s Widened America's Class Divide.
That's right. And of course, Jim Narekas is he and Janine Jackson are going to interview you for fairness and accuracy in reporting. You know,
I would love it.
yeah, I gotta put it all out there.
Thank you.
Look, while we're here, this is a community. Sheila Garland, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, Lenny Brody. Part of the blessing of having the show change format so that we can see each other is that we can see each other, we connect differently. And we are the ones who have to build a coalition that we keep saying needs to be built. We're looking at it right here. So let's make that happen. He's going to be coming to Chicago. We're just trying to work it out right now. But our convention, the Rainbow Push Convention, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, will be the 13th through the 17th of August. It's leading into the Democratic Convention. And your work will be cut out for you, Attorney Hoffler, because I think you're going to have to go help a lot of people out who might get arrested. I mean, and let me just start off with you as I bid Dr. Gibbs and Jim Narekas adieu, but you're more than welcome to stay, but I knew that they were running today. What are your rights? You know, we keep talking about freedom of speech. We keep talking about the First Amendment. And as I understand it from my remembrances in civics, it has 5 pillars. You know, speech, religion, assembly, petition, and press. I mean, and these issues converge here. And now you have, as you could hear, the demonstrators are being moved at least 4 miles out, but there are fewer and fewer spaces in Chicago where they'll be able to demonstrate. Now, you know, Attorney Hoffler, people are going to go where they're going to go, particularly if it's masses of them. What are your rights? I mean, how is this supposed to work? I mean, particularly when the encampment at the University of Chicago, which is a school that costs $100,000 a year for an undergraduate. $100,000 a year. That's all the way at the top. Their encampment was broken up by the police at 4:40 in the morning. And the police were wearing riot gear. Mm-hmm. That's where we are. Mm-hmm. What do you foresee for this convention? I mean, because of course you're the former president of the National Bar Association, which is more than 65,000 lawyers. It's the largest no-list Black bar association in the country. You're the chair of Rainbow Push. You analyze these issues and more, all legal issues, on Court TV. You have your own show. You'll be on tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock?
11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
Okay, which is 10 o'clock Central. That's right. On WAOK.
WAOK. Mm-hmm.
CK, what do you foresee? It seems it's just something is just, it makes me uneasy here.
Well, Santita and everyone, it should make everyone very uneasy. So let me answer your questions. One, what are your rights? Well, people do have a right to protest. They have a right to assembly in a non-violent way.
Okay.
So that's the key. Non-violence. That's a constitutional right. I'm just giving you the overall picture based on case law where we are. They have the right to assemble. They have the right to protest in a non-violent way. But they also have to abide by any local ordinances. If it's on the campus of a school, the policies and procedures of the school for assembly, for protest. And every school, every university, especially the public universities, have policies that allow students to assemble. And just as the public universities have that right or have those policies and procedures, so do the cities. So The city of Chicago has its own, and in every city in the union, basically in urban areas, its own policies and procedures that govern how and where people can protest. There's nothing unusual about that. Even if we think of the little town where Ahmaud Arbery's case took place, there was a big issue about where people could protest or demonstrate. They were protesting in a nonviolent way, but yet the defense lawyers wanted to shut them down, wanted Transformative Justice Coalition and the ministers assembled, including your dad, to not be allowed to protest. The judge got it right. He said, no, they have a constitutional right. They're protesting within the confines of the rules and regulations and the ordinances that govern this town. There is not a problem. Similarly, on a much larger scale, the protesters are going to have to abide by the rules and regulations and ordinances in Chicago that govern protests. So that's where you look at, of course, the mayor and other officials, commissioners and the like, to make sure that you understand what the rules of engagement are. And I'm pretty sure that the protesters, those who are planning on protesting, have legal counsel that have looked at that issue. So when it comes to where they can protest.
So wait a minute, would you advise those people who are applying for permits, who are organizing these demonstrations, would you advise them first to have a legal counsel?
Absolutely. They must have legal counsel. They must have legal counsel. And there are many lawyers and organizations that work, and some of them will do this free of charge because they are very, very wedded to movements, very wedded to ensuring people having the right to speak and the right to express themselves in a non-violent form. And I have to underscore non-violent form. As soon as things become violent, as soon as you have an engagement with law enforcement and the like and all of that, the rules of engagement change completely and people will be arrested.
Well, see, I think that's why I see the role of these counter protesters for not being called out by corporate media, because they're the provocateurs.
They're always provocateurs, Santita.
Yeah.
Always, it's got to be expected. It's got to be planned. We have to, there've always been provocateurs. When your dad was protesting, when Dr. King was protesting, and others before them and after, during, today, they're always provocateurs. So we have to expect that. We know there are provocateurs on every campus where there have been major protests. And sometimes that clouds the ability of those who are protesting, no matter which side they're protesting for. These are legitimate protests, and people in this country, in a democracy, we have the ability to protest. But we've got a plan. If you are protesting right now, you should have legal counsel advising you, firstly. And secondly, you have to have a plan to how do you address provocateurs? Do you know, or are you the provocateur? Do you know what the rules of engagement are? So in a city like Chicago, that's a huge city, one of our largest metropolises in this country, that has long-standing rules for protests, where you've got a mayor, Brandon Johnson, who's on point with this, who is taking public positions about this. There's no reason why people should not know the rules of engagement and should not engage in counsels to advise them in general. You have to expect law enforcement is going to be there full throttle. You have to expect maybe the National Guard will be there full throttle. You've got to expect the U.S. Marshals will be there full throttle. You have to expect that the branches of the military will be there full throttle, because we have who? The President of the United States, members of Congress, and the like. So we cannot expect security to be light. We cannot expect anything to be taken lightly, nor should we. That never has been the case at these conventions. And while, as Dwight McKee said, there's a certain amount of pomp and circumstance, there's a certain amount of very serious business for the party and the leadership of the party. The brass is going to be there. Maximum security. There must be. Anyone who doesn't understand that and get that and think differently is going to be very surprised. So that's, Santita, what I view from a legal landscape. All of those components, all those stakeholders have legal rights, and there are things that they will do and they're going to do to protect our commander-in-chief. Secondly, members of Congress. Thirdly, local and state leaders. Fourthly, the people who are participating in the convention. And that means that whether it's 4 miles away or 50 miles away, there are going to be appropriate barriers to protect them. Forget about silencing protesters just to protect them. That is the norm, and that's what we should expect, especially now. So once you get past that, once you accept that, and you've got to accept it, there should not be any group, anyone who plans on protesting who could say, well, we're going to buck the system. You can try to buck the system, but don't try to buck that system, because that system has always existed for any convention. And with the way things are right now in this country, the threats of violence, we should expect it to be enhanced. That is a risk assessment analysis. And so, and their counsel have to advise them within the context of that. The good news is there's going to be full knowledge of what can and can't happen. That has nothing to do with the silencing of these voices. So that's security driven, that's risk assessment driven, that's DNC or RNC driven, any convention of this size with the level of brass that will be there, we can expect that. So that's in terms of the rights, firstly. So what do I expect? I expect there will be massive chaos, because some groups will take, not everybody knows this advice, not everybody looks at this, and young people have a need to be heard on this. It's always been the case. When there's controversy, where people disagree, whether it was the Vietnam War or anything else, whether it's the civil rights movement, young people who have driven in the past a lot of this, want to be heard, but they can be heard in a nonviolent way. And that's what I think, Santita, that's why I said I think it could be chaotic. It will be chaotic as soon as there's engagement. Now, we have to look at what's happening in the recent past, like as in yesterday, as in last week, as in 2 weeks ago, on college campuses. Violence has erupted. There are provocateurs.
Violence has been provoked.
Right.
And
But
been
it's
initiated.
Whether they're provocateurs or not, Santita,
Yeah.
it's erupted, and it's going to likely erupt again.
Yeah, that's why I think that they need to be trained in nonviolent resistance.
Mhm.
You know, because before, and just stay right there, Attorney C.K. Hoffler. Sheila Garland from the Poor People's Campaign. I want you to introduce this gentleman, Lenny Brody. We only have about 10 minutes left here, but I want to bring him back on for another show, because Attorney Hoffler, who's the chair of Rainbow Push, that's why she's chair of Rainbow Push. She can help us stay out of a lot of jams. Really, I mean, to even understand that going into this, you need to consult with lawyers. Dr. King had lawyers. Reverend Jackson had lawyers, because jail was part of it.
Mhm.
And so I want you to just bring us someone who was at this convention, because you said, oh, before you do this show today, you gotta have this gentleman on.
Yeah. So no, I'm really excited, Santita, that Lenny is able to join us. Lenny was at the 1968 Democratic Convention.
Mm-hmm.
He's a longtime activist. He's a local activist in local electoral politics. And so I'm happy to call him a friend.
And steeped in history. But first,
before
before we turn this over to Mr. Brody, let me say this again. Rainbow Push, our convention is August 13th to the 17th. We're leading in.
I've taken note of that.
But the Poor People's Campaign, you're having your national convention in Washington on what dates?
On June 29th.
And what is the national website where people can go find out how their states can be involved?
Right. It's the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. If you type that into your search engine, you'll come upon that site, and then you can go to your particular state, click on your state, and then you can start getting connected to how the states are going to be making their way to.
And you'll be coming back on this show, because we want everyone to get to the Poor People's Campaign, to their national convening on June 29th. But Mr. Brody, I want to thank you for being with us today. You were at Attorney C.K. Hoffler. He was at the 1968 convention.
I know.
And anyone who was there 56 years ago, I want to hear because the parallels are striking. Everybody's talking about that. We've got Dwight McKee backstage. I'm going to bring him back on, but I've got about 7 minutes left. They belong to you.
Okay, I am very excited to hear that Operation Push's convention is leading into the Democratic National Convention. In fact, I really think that the Operation Push should enter in discussions with the Poor People's Campaign, because there really needs to be a responsible political center for these demonstrations for the upcoming convention. And a lot of the protests are being organized by smaller groups, by who have limited experience. And I think I hope that this excitement I feel about that convention could really come to fruition. Because one of the things that happened in 1968 was, on the one hand, we were really inspired by the civil rights movement, and that framed our outlook. On the other hand, we were relatively not that well organized, not that well experienced, and we were facing a Mayor Daley, who was really more in control than the situation now. See, the situation now, not only do we have Brandon, who's a friend of the movement, but we also have a situation where the national government will be controlling a lot of the atmosphere. Whereas in 1968, it really was Mayor Daley, and he was calling the shots, and that's why it turned violent. I think we really have the opportunity today with Mayor Brandon Johnson, with Operation Push's convention, and the Poor People's Campaign will certainly, be organizing also around the elections. And I would hope that there'd be some kind of role for the Poor People's.
Absolutely. Well, there is a role.
Yeah.
No, I put you in it. We put you in it. I've got the chair. She's above me here.
Yeah. No, this is the first I heard. I'm so excited.
Rainbow Push has always been, it's been a gathering place.
Right.
For activists. And I think that is why Madam Chair and the board and the people who staff Push, Attorney Hoffler, we've wanted a place where people could gather with instruction, and so they could be helped to become as responsible as they can be. Because, this is something Reverend Jackson has done for a living. Reverend Dr. King pulled Reverend out of seminary. He said, I can teach you more about theology than you could ever learn there. You can come with me. That's really, because my father looked at him like he was crazy. Because everybody in that group, they had doctorate degrees, they had master's degrees, they had gone to these top schools. My father's like, I've got a full scholarship at the University of Chicago. You mean to tell me you're going to have me leave a semester before? Are you kidding? You've got a doctorate. What? He said, no. For the kind of ministry that you need to go into, let me show you how to do it. Thank God he only had 2 years left to live. 2.5 years left. And so I get it. And so I'm just saying, you have to be taught how to do this. That's right. To have chairwoman C.K. Hoffler say, wait a minute, you need legal representation. You need to know what your parameters are. Many of us don't know that, Mr. Brody.
Right. And we need training in nonviolent resistance also. Yes. The Poor People's Campaign has done that before we've had civil disobedience. I think, I would hope that Operation Push can become a center for that leading up to the convention, and I'm sure the Poor People's Campaign nationally can work with this, have people trained in nonviolence, and become a real political stabilizing center for these demonstrations so they don't become scattered and provocateurs can, provoke violence and take the message off what we're talking about, because there's a real political crisis in this country today. And we need responsible people to speak out about it, who understand, what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in this country, and can speak to those issues and can speak to the American people. We really need that to be developed. And we need centers, organized centers for that, because right now I think there are 4 or 5 different protests being organized and permits being requested. I feel that if Operation Push could play a role, that would really change the character and really focus the demonstrations on the problems that the American people face. So
we have an organizing meeting for the convention on the 16th in a couple of days. I invite you and Sheila to be a part of that, and I will follow up with you.
Okay.
Dwight McKee, we have meetings at Rainbow Push every Sunday at 4, because this is going to take real training, Attorney Hunt. This is going to take real training Dwight McKee was the head of the youth division in Breadbasket, and he worked when Reverend Jackson was the youth pastor at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. That's how we came into contact with him 60 years ago. And people need to understand. I mean, in the training and the movement, they would put you in a room and you would physically be attacked, and they showed you how. You know that you come from that, Mr. Brody. We have to train the young people and other people who just want to be involved. This is what you need to do, because you can see that they're well intentioned, but they don't have that training. Dwight, I literally have 30 seconds, and it's a tight 30. Your thoughts?
Well, unknown variable in this is going to be how the police act, because they ultimately are going to use this as a point of, vengeance and vindictiveness. And many of them they're not just they're not pro-Israel. They're just anti anybody who ain't a policeman. And so they're going to be the real, ones that's going to decide the tone of where this convention goes.
Sheila, that has made you crack up. I
just the way he framed it.
I got 15 seconds, but no, he's got a gift for that.
No, it's a good point. No, and I think the police certainly. I don't know what the role of the CPD is going to be, given the national character of the convention. But Brandon has been taken arrest. He's part of the movement. So I think he's going to approach this in a very measured way. He's going to protect, the right to assemble, the right to protest. I'm counting on that. That was one of the reasons why I supported him.
Well, we're going to have to push to make that happen, because also remember, the police, you don't necessarily have control over your police. Ask John Kennedy.
This is true.
I'm not being.
No.
Ask Bill de Blasio in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You get in there and you see that they are a force all unto themselves, and it's tough. It's tough. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, chair of Rainbow Push. When will you be on Court TV? I've got a heart out.
Well, I just finished Court TV about an hour ago, but I will be on Court TV later this week on Friday. I don't have the time yet because I'm traveling tomorrow and in board meetings Wednesday and Thursday. I'm just looking at my schedule. But on Friday, I'm scheduled to be on Court TV. I just don't want to throw out a time that's not confirmed.
Okay. WAOK tomorrow?
I will be on WAOK tomorrow from 11 to 12.
Okay, Eastern Standard Time.
Eastern Standard Time.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about the convention. But just very quickly, Santita, I think it's an excellent idea to have the training at Rainbow. I know we have very little time because your dad, Rainbow Push, the leadership has always been at the forefront of these types of issues and providing a place for people to become informed, to be trained, and to understand the rules of engagement, whether it's in protesting or other things that we've been involved in. So I think it's an excellent idea. It may very well already be in the works, but I will look at that question very closely with the leadership starting tonight, actually.
Absolutely. Sheila Garland, the Poor People's Campaign, June 29th in Washington, D.C. Go to which website?
The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Click on your state to get all the information.
All right, everybody. We need you there, and we need you here in Chicago. And Sheila Garland and Lenny Brody will be helping us to organize the Rainbow Push Convention and educate our young people. They will benefit so greatly from being able to talk with you, Lenny Brody, and you, Sheila Garland, and you, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, and Dwight McKee. And so just thank God for all of the guests today. And thank you for listening to AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Stay right here for the best talk in progressive politics in all of Minnesota and all of the country. I love you, everybody. I'm